Hello everyone, and welcome to Poetry Month at Mississippi State University. My name is Salvador Bartera, and I am an Associate Professor of Classics at Mississippi State University. I normally teach Latin and Greek, not modern Greek, the language spoken today in Greece, but ancient Greek, the language that in its various dialects was spoken in the Greek world for many centuries, from even before the times of Homer up to the times of the Gospels, whose Greek is essentially very similar to the Greek Plato used for his dialogues. Today I will read with you a passage from the Odyssey, one of the oldest and most influential poems of all times, which we still read today and which is at the foundation of Western literature. Indeed, its main protagonist, Odysseus, or to use his Latin name Ulysses, is perhaps the most famous hero of antiquity, and his desire for knowledge and for testing human nature make him one of the most fascinating and controversial characters to have come down to us. The Odyssey that we read today is evidently not the original poem that was composed by its author or authors, although it is probably very similar to the text that, for example, Cicero or Caesar read in the 1st century BC. When, however, the Odyssey was composed and by whom remains to this day a controversial issue. What nobody seems to deny is that the Homeric poems were originally composed orally and were conceived to be enjoyed live, with a professional poet, a bard, performing by heart, and before an audience, sections of these poems of various length. These bards were professional singers who traveled throughout the Greek world and were highly regarded for their ability to remember an impressive number of lines. They were celebrities, not very different from our modern singers, who toured the world performing their hits. Homer, who is traditionally considered the author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, was probably one such performer, a professional bard of considerable talent, whose name became inextricably associated with the Iliad and the Odyssey. Whether, however, he was the original author of the poems, who he was when he lived, or if a real person called Homer ever existed at all, are all questions on which modern scholars still disagree. This whole issue is known as the Omeric Question. Some scholars think that the author of the poems, as we have them today, lived long after Homer. Because of the many inconsistencies that the poems show, they argue, the version we have cannot be the original compilation, but the result of centuries of oral performances. The different stages of these poems are also confirmed by their linguistic analysis, which shows various historical layers. Other scholars, however, point out the fundamental unity of the poems, their undeniable artistry, which cannot be explained without assuming the intervention of a great poet, at some point at least. When the poems were first put together is difficult to say, but many scholars agree that they were written down for the first time around the 6th century BC in Athens, at the time of the tyrant Pisistratus. The final version of the poems, so to speak, however, was probably fixed not until about 3-4 centuries later in Alexandria, where famous scholars working at the library studied the text and produced what we would call a scholarly edition, along with the commentary. As to the original composition of the two poems, various dates have been proposed, with the majority of scholars tending towards around 800 BC, although most scholars believe that the Odyssey was composed later than the Iliad, and that, although both poems suggest a single author with an overall design, though surely based on a pre-existing oral tradition, the Iliad and the Odyssey are not by the same person. Let us now turn to the Odyssey. The poem, in 24 books, narrates the return of Odysseus from Troy, after a 10-year-long war. Unlike the Iliad, which is mainly a war narrative, the Odyssey has no epic battle scenes, but is instead full of adventures, with many elements, including magic, that we associate to folk tales and even fairy tales. Odysseus is the main protagonist of this poem, although we do not encounter him until Book 5. The first 4 books are entirely devoted to telling the situation in Ithaca, Odysseus' island, where his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus wonder whether Odysseus is still alive. The Trojan War had ended 10 years before, but no news of Odysseus had reached his wife or son. Some men, whom we call the suitors, want to take control of the island and force Penelope to marry one of them. Penelope, however, who embodies the quintessential loyal wife, does not want to betray her husband and tries with every trick at her disposal to delay the inevitable. Odysseus first appears in Book 5, where we find the hero alone on the island of Ogygia, where he has been trapped by the nymph Calypso for 7 years. When he is finally let go, he wrecks and lands on the island of the Phaeacians, who rescue and welcome this strange man. At the court of the Phaeacians, after he's been bathed and fed, Odysseus finally reveals himself and tells his host about his many adventures prior to Calypso. This is the most famous section of the poem, all narrated in a flashback, with the known episodes of the Cyclops Polyphemus, the king of the winds Hellas, and the sorceress Circe, who turns many of Odysseus' companions into pigs. When Odysseus is finally able to rescue his friends and depart from Circe, she tells him that he must visit the famous seer Tiresias in the Underworld. Book 11 of the Odyssey is thus known as the Nekyia, the Book of the Dead. I chose this book because it is unique. It is self-contained, and at the same time looks backwards to the Trojan War and its heroes, and forward to Odysseus' return to Ithaca. It is also the first literary description of the Underworld to have survived in Western literature, and is strongly influential for similar journeys to the Underworld as we have them in, for example, Virgil's Aeneid or Dante's Divine Comedy. Unlike Aeneas or Dante, however, Odysseus never enters the Underworld proper, but only reaches its entrance, where, after a sacrificial libation, he summons with blood the spirits of the departed. Book 11 of the Odyssey is dark. The Underworld is imagined by Homer as wrapped in cloud and mist, where the sun never shines. After the spirits, enticed by the blood of the sacrificial victims, begin to appear, the hero encounters famous women and some of the men who had fought with him at Troy, who tell him what happened to them after the war was over. Among the most famous encounters is the one with Agamemnon, the king of all Greeks, who tells Odysseus of the betrayal of his wife Clytemnestra, who killed him as soon as he returned home. Next, Odysseus sees the spirit of Achilles, who sadly mourns over his choice to live a short but famous life. Odysseus also meets the great Ajax, whom he had cheated of the weapons of Achilles, and who had committed suicide after going mad. He is still angry at Odysseus, and does not reply a single word to Odysseus' questions. But perhaps the most famous and sad meeting of all is the one Odysseus has with his own mother Anticlea, whom he had left alive in Ithaca many years before, and whose passing he ignored. It is a part of Book 11 that I will read to you today. I will first read Odysseus' arrival to the Underworld, his meeting with Tiresias, and with his mother Anticleia. I will read these lines in a very recent translation by Emily Wilson, the first by a woman in English. Then I will read to you this very short section of the original Greek that you see on this slide, so that you can appreciate the beautiful sound of Homeric poetry and its rhythmic pace. Book 11 of the Odyssey, translated by Emily Wilson. We reached the limits of deep-flowing ocean, where the Cimmerians live and have their city. Their land is covered up in mist and cloud. The shining sun god never looks on them with his bright beams, not when he rises up into the starry sky, nor when he turns back from the heavens to earth. Destructive night blankets the world for all poor mortals there. We beached our ship, drove out the sheep, and went to seek the stream of ocean where the goddess had told us we must go. Eurylochus and Perimedes made the sacrifice. I drew my sword and dug a hole, a fathom widthways and lengthways, and I poured libations for all the dead. First, honey mixed sweet wine, and lastly water. On the top I sprinkled barley, and made a solemn vow that if I reached my homeland, I would sacrifice my best young heifer, still uncalved, and pile the altar high with offerings for the dead. I promised for Tiresias as well a pure black sheep, the best in all my flock. So with these vows I called upon the dead. I took the sheep and slit their throats above their pit. Black blood flowed out. The spirits came up out of Erebus and gathered around. Teenagers, girls and boys, the old who suffered for many years, and fresh young brides whom labor destroyed in youth. And many men cut down in battle by bronze spears, still dressed in armor stained with their blood. From every side they crowded around the pit, with eerie cries. Pale fear took hold of me. I roused my men and told them to flay the sheep that I had killed and burned them, and pray to Hades and Persephone. I drew my sword and sat on guard, preventing the spirits of the dead from coming near the blood, till I had met Tiresias. I will now skip over Odysseus' first encounter with his comrade Elpenor, who had died at Circe's. Then came the spirit of my own dead mother, Autolycus' daughter Anticleia, whom I had left alive when I went off to holy Troy. On seeing her, I wept in pity, but despite my bitter grief, I would not let her near the blood till I talked to Tiresias. The prophet came, holding a golden scepter, and he knew me and said, "King under Zeus, Odysseus, adept survivor, why did you abandon the sun, poor man, to see the dead, and this place without joy? Step back now from the pit, hold up my sharp sword, so that I may drink the blood and speak to you." At that, I sheathed my silver-studded sword. When he had drunk the murky blood, the famous prophet spoke. "Odysseus, you think of going home as honey sweet, but gods will make it bitter. I think Poseidon will not cease to feel incensed because you blinded his dear son. You have to suffer, but you can get home, if you control your urges and your men. Turn from the purple death and sail your ship towards the island of Trinacria. There you will find grazing cows and fine fat sheep, belonging to the god who sees and hears all things, the sun god. If you leave them be, keeping your mind fixed on your journey home, you may still get to Ithaca despite great losses. But if you hurt those cows, I see disaster for your sheep and for your men. If you yourself escape, you will come home late and exhausted, in a stranger's boat, having destroyed your men. And you will find invaders eating your supplies at home, courting your wife with gifts. Then you will match the suitors' violence and kill them all, inside your halls, through tricks or in the open, with sharp bronze weapons. When those men are dead, you have to go away and take an oar to people with no knowledge of the sea, who do not salt their food. They never saw a ship's red prow, nor oars, the wings of boats. I prophesy the signs of things to come. When you meet somebody, a traveler, who calls the thing you carry on your back a winnowing fan, then fix that oar in earth and make fine sacrifices to Poseidon, a bull and a stud boar. Then you will go home and offer holy hecatombs to all the deathless gods who live in heaven, each in order. Gentle death will come to you, far from the sea of comfortable old age, your people flourishing. So it will be. I said, Tiresias, I hope the gods spin out this fate for me. But tell me this, and tell the truth. I saw my mother's spirit, sitting in silence near the blood, refusing even to talk to me or meet my eyes. My lord, how can I make her recognize that it is me? At once he made his answer. That is an easy matter to explain. Whenever you allow one of these spirits to come here near the blood, it will be able to speak the truth to you. As soon as you push them away, they have to live again. With that, Tiresias, the prophet spirit, was finished. He departed to the house of Hades. I stayed rooted there in place until my mother came and drank the blood. She knew me then and spoke in tones of grief. My child, how did you come here, through the darkness while you were still alive? This place is hard for living men to see. There are great rivers and dreadful gulfs, including the great ocean, which none can cross on foot. One needs a ship. Have you come wandering here, so far from Troy, with ship and crew? Have you not yet arrived in Ithaca, nor seen your wife at home? I answered, Mother, I was forced to come to Hades to consult the prophet spirit, Thieban Tiresias. I have not yet come near to Greece, nor reached my home country. I have been lost and wretchedly unhappy since I first followed mighty Agamemnon to Troy, the land of horses, to make war upon the people there. But tell me, how was a sad death brought upon you? By long illness? Or did the archer Artemis destroy you with gentle arrows? Tell me too about my father and the son I left behind. Are they still honored as the kings? Or has another taken over, saying I will not return? And tell me what my wife is thinking, and her plans. Does she stay with her son and focus on his care, or has the best of the Achaeans married her? My mother answered, She stays firm, her heart is strong, she is still in your house, and all her nights are passed in misery and days in tears. But no one has usurped your throne. Telemachus still tends the whole estate, unharmed and feast in style, as lords should do, and is always asked to council meetings. Your father stays out in the countryside. He will not come to town. He does not sleep on a real bed with blankets and fresh sheets. In winter he sleeps inside, by the fire, just lying in the ashes with the slaves. His clothes are rags. In summer and at harvest, the piles of fallen leaves are beds for him. He lies there grieving, full of sorrow, longing for your return. His old age is not easy, and that is why I met my fate and died. The goddess did not shoot me in my home, aiming with gentle arrows, nor did the sickness suck all the strength out from my limbs, with long and cruel wasting. No, it was missing you, Odysseus, my sunshine, your sharp mind and your kind heart. That took sweet life from me. Then in my heart I wanted to embrace the spirit of my mother. She was dead, and I did not know how. 3 times I tried, longing to touch her, but 3 times her ghost flew from my arms, like shadows or like dreams. Sharp pain pierced deeper in me as I cried. No, mother, why do you not stay for me and let me hold you, even here in Hades? Let us wrap loving arms around each other and find a frigid comfort in shared tears. But is this really you, or has the queen sent me a phantom to increase my grief? She answered, "Oh, my child, you are the most unlucky man alive. Persephone is not deceiving you. This is the rule for mortals when we die. Our muscles cease to hold the flesh and skeleton together. As soon as life departs from our white bones, the force of blazing fire destroys the corpse. The spirit flies away and soon is gone, just like a dream. Now hurry to the light. Remember all these things, so you may tell your wife in times to come." So this was a relatively long passage from an English translation, and now I'm going to read this short passage in the original Greek. The poem is written in hexameters, the typical verse of epic poetry, which consists of 6 feet of long and short syllables. I have underlined some key features of this passage. The first is the fact that, while in the original Greek, Homer makes the ship of Odysseus the subject of the sentence, notice that our translator chose instead to say, "we reached." The other 3 underlined words are to show you Homer's fondness for epithets, which are not just literary but also mnemonic devices that the poet used to fill recurrent spots in the hexameter, and also allowed him a certain flexibility in his oral composition and performance. Enjoy these few lines. Hades peirathikane batrou oke anoio, enza de kemirion andron demoste poliste, eri kaine thele ke kalumenoi ude potautus, eri osfaethon kataderkedei actin essin, uso potan stekesi pros uranon asteroenta, uso potan ansepiga ian apuras nosen protateia, allepi nuxoloe tetatai delosi protoisi. Thank you.